Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, we've had the anniversary event for Diablo 4 going on for a few days now, and while it was relatively lackluster to begin with, a hotfix released quite recently that has just, well, completely changed the entire flow of it, and also the level of rewards that we get in a bunch of different ways. So let's talk about these changes, and more importantly, how to make the most out of them, because right now, with Mother's Embrace, the buff that we have the highest experience gain rate that we'll have this season at a 35% increase, though this will drop down to 25% next week. In other words, if you want to take advantage of this event to level a character specifically, doing it sooner is better than doing it later on. As well, we currently have a 35% increased gold multiplier, but at the same time the experience buff gets nerfed, the gold gain will go up to a 50% increase. But after some testing, it seems that players have found this is not affecting Tree of Whispers hand-ins or event gold rewards, which is obviously a bit of a misstep, as those are the main reliable sources of getting gold right now anyways. But hopefully we will see that change in patch 1.4.2 with the actual numerical changes to the Mother's Blessing buff as well. Hopefully they'll make it actually change to affect these things too. But then we get to the real meat of it all, the fun part, which is the sheer amount of 925 item power equipment that you can get from opening the bags that drop from the treasure goblins. Not to mention the rest of the normal drops from the goblins themselves, which have also been buffed in the recent hotfix. And so while before it was sort of not really worth going out of your way to farm these goblins compared to regular game activities like Helltide, now it has heavily swung, and if you want 925 item power equipment, tons of varied legendaries, uniques, and sort of crafting materials, gear, boss summoning stuff, this is just currently the best method in the game, quite simply, and there are only a couple of steps to it, really. First things first, it seems for whatever reason, the spawn rate of the bonus treasure goblins out in the open world just isn't really high enough to be consistent. It's much more just, oh hey, look, an extra pile of loot, if you happen to find one, rather than an actually focusable farm option for them in the open world. For that, instead what we want is Nightmare Dungeons, for a few reasons, but first, there are rooms in Nightmare Dungeons that can just spawn with a load of goblins in them to begin with. This is an RNG chance, but very good when it does happen. But secondly, more importantly and more reliably, is Greed Shrines. These can be everywhere, obviously, but Greed Shrines are more easy to find in Nightmare Dungeons, and Greed Shrines will, right now, spawn loot goblins as you kill monsters with them active. So a Greed Shrine inside of a Nightmare Dungeon is essentially just an excuse to create a ton of bonus loot goblins on top of your head, especially in a fast dungeon clearing focused build. And it's worth mentioning, if you happen to pass one of these Greed Shrines in the open world, you should absolutely be taking advantage of it right now, but it is of course just much more reliable to find in Nightmare Dungeons. Then it does get deeper than this even. If your goal is purely these bags and the goblins themselves, then you want to do tier 41 Nightmare Dungeons, or as close as you can get to that without going under that tier, as monsters that spawn there are guaranteed to drop 925 item power gear. That is how the game generally works in Season 4 now, though, but this does stay especially true for the loot goblins now that the hotfix got rid of the issues that they were having. That said, it also appears that killing even higher level treasure goblins, which you would do by doing higher tier Nightmare Dungeons, doesn't actually do anything to increase their loot quality. There's no like Reign of Greater affixes from a specifically higher level enemy goblin, so it's just better to do closer to that minimum tier requirement of 41 for sheer speed of getting through it. That said, if you're also after something like glyph experience for your Paragon glyphs, you can always just push that tier up a bit to double up, as long as it's still comfortable to clear quickly for you. On the same note of which sigils you want to use, you also want the extra shrines affix of the dungeons themselves. This will spawn more shrines, which of course includes Greed Shrines, which we've already talked about, which then spawn treasure goblins and thus big piles of loot as a result. So you want to run through these dungeons once you have the right sigil, killing as little as possible, spending as little time doing anything and stopping the minimal amount outside of required objectives until you find a Greed Shrine. Then you want to set up so that you are ready to go on a killing spree once it is activated, wait for cooldowns if you need to, activate some random other shrine if there's one nearby that isn't Greed, whatever it takes to make your actual Greed Shrine active period involve as much enemy killing as possible. I've seen up to as many as 10 treasure goblins even spawn in large groups, and this honestly gets even simpler if you get like a Cursed Shrine event that just constantly spawns enemies on top of you while the buff is already active anyways. The goblins goblins themselves drop a bunch of loot, including uniques now if you're trying to just upgrade certain parts of your build. They now drop large amounts of scattered prisms as well, which is fantastic for adding gem slots to all of your new gear as needed, and they drop boss summon materials too, which is pretty cool. And importantly, nightmare sigils. So for each goblin kill, you get a pile of actual gear, a bag with more gear, scattered prisms, ladder boss summon materials of various kinds, and then the thing that keeps the whole thing running properly, the sigils. Because in order to get high chances of finding greed shrines, you need the extra shrines affix on your nightmare dungeon. In order to hunt specific dungeon affixes, you need to repeatedly just craft and dismantle sigils until you get that correct one. And if you are doing that, you will generally be running in a sigil powder deficit. But because treasure goblins now drop sigils, and the nightmare dungeons themselves also do so at the end of them, you can then salvage those sigils and keep your loop going pretty consistently, so you can just keep crafting sigils until you get the extra shrines affix, and it's as simple as that. Other than that, the only real other recommendations that I have is to bring in a sort of area of effect and group clear focused build, especially something with high movement speed for getting through the place as quickly as possible, rather than a slow single target boss killer focused thing. I know, no one's going to actually go out of their way to change their entire build for just goblin killing in dungeons just to change back immediately afterwards, but it is worth mentioning that it is easier to do so if there are smaller changes that you can make in your build to lean into this style of content more than others, which is just running at maximum speed against underpowered enemies. And then finally, this is sort of the case for most content in the game, honestly. It is just far more efficient to do this in a group, especially a group of 4. In a group, you only need one nightmare sigil between the 4 of you with the correct affix of extra shrines per run. You all get your own instance loot drop from each goblin, so you're not actually taking anything away from each other. And importantly, you can also get more goblins per greed shrine, as each player will have goblins spawn on top of them from killing things with the greed shrine. Even if other players are killing things with the greed shrine active, it will spawn goblins on party members, provided there are of course enough enemies to actually make that help the system. But it is definitely something that is really worth mentioning regardless. So to sort of sum things up, experience and gold are boosted quite a bit right now, so take advantage of those if you want to. But the big deal right now is just the absolute horde of treasure goblins that you can find and fight by sticking to nightmare dungeons tier 41 and above with the extra shrines affix, hunting down greed shrines with this, and then just massacring the dungeon while they're active to spawn bonus loot goblins. The loot that the goblins drop themselves is incredible. The bags they drop now also contain really solid equipment. Sure, the Blood Maiden event in Helltide also gives insane amounts of loot, but it's just on a different sort of scale really, because maximizing the goblin hunting system right now can really just result in far too much gear far too quickly, and if you get quick at it, you cut out the waiting time that you would have from something like Blood Maidens 2. That's it for today everyone, just a quick discussion and sort of a strategy guide for how to best take advantage of the crazy loot pop and goodie bags that are the now fixed and updated treasure goblins for the March of the Goblins anniversary event in Diablo 4. Hopefully these tips help you out, and of course if you have any of your own for others, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.